Well, this is new. I actually hurt my back playing the game for today's review. I was so engrossed in it that I was hunched over in my computer chair leaning into the screen, just getting sucked into this game world for hours and hours and hours. That was not a good idea, but I did it anyway. What kind of game can make me do this? Well, yeah.
Europa Universalis, developed by Paradox Entertainment AB and published by Vision Park AB in Europe in 2000 and in 2001 by Strategy First in the USA. Faith, power, wealth, 1492 to 1792. Yes, this is a game with a major hard-on for historical accuracy, as you might have guessed from the very specific years on the cover. Look at all that text. Appropriate that the box is like 70% text and 30% graphics, because that's pretty close to the ratio you get in the game too. And in case you're wondering, Paradox Entertainment is indeed the same as Paradox Interactive nowadays, the company currently most known for games like Crusader Kings 2 and the upcoming Cities Skylines. But their own history goes back much further, with their roots in Target Games AB, founded in 1980 but declared bankruptcy in 1999. Having nothing to do with the American anti-Walmart retailer, the Sweden-based Target Games developed and published all sorts of games and products, from fantasy role-playing tabletop stuff to miniatures and figurines to computer games. One of these games was the odd-to-pronounce Sverige, as close as I'm gonna get, released in 1997 for Windows PCs, a strategy game where the goal is to end up as the King of Sweden by way of resource management, trade, and politics. By the time Paradox Entertainment rose over the ashes of Target Games, Sverige had hit its third iteration, and a new game using similar ideas was on the horizon. This was Europa Universalis, which was not only based on the aesthetic and mechanics of Sverige, but used the name and rules of a board game from 1993, also called Europa Universalis, by Azer Wish Enterprise. Inside the American release of the computer game here, you get the game on a single CD-ROM, the all-important fold-out hotkey reference sheet, a strategy-first catalog that makes me want to spend far too much money, and one heck of a manual. At times this reads more like a school textbook than documentation for a computer game, and is overwhelming if you're one of those that likes to read manuals entirely before playing, but for a daunting game such as this, you have to be dauntless. So let the manual be your first clue to brace yourself. Complexity is coming. Europa Universalis launches with a paradoxical logo or two, followed by a grandiose introductory cinematic, originally narrated in lovely Swedish.
Det var framstegens tid, då ofrälse byggde mäktiga borgar med blod och svett.
You then get a menu that just screams strategy game, which lets you play in either single-player or multiplayer mode. Multiplayer is where a game like this can really shine, but that's only if you can find enough people as willing to lose weeks of their life as you are, so we'll just be looking at single-player. Here you've got 10 scenarios, 1 tutorial, and any saved games you've made. The tutorial is an absolute must, and even that can take upwards of 4 hours to complete, but if you're familiar with other Paradox Grand Strategy games or are just insane, you can sink your teeth into the meat from the get-go. 9 of these 10 scenarios are based on specific moments in wars in colonial European history, but there's one called Fantasia that's a real treat. It allows you to just go crazy and mess with civilizations from around the world in a historical context, but without following history to the letter like the rest of them. So if you want to go all Sid Meier and try to wipe out China as the Iroquois, this is your scenario. Once you've decided on what to manipulate, you can then choose from a variety of victory conditions and gameplay options. There are 4 main ways to win each scenario, from gaining the most points by a certain year to taking over the known world, so combine this with the various empires you can play as and randomized and historical events, and the number of scenarios effectively balloons to a much higher number than 10. So, this is Europa Universalis. Oh my god. Okay, let me just make something clear. This is a game that can easily take upwards of 20 hours to complete a smaller scenario, and that will balloon to 40, 60, 80 hours and beyond for a full 300-year reign. If you're not the type that loves sinking days of your life into a skirmish over a few territories along the outskirts of Catalonia, you can move right along. However, if you're like me and that just appeals to you on a deep carnal level, and you can't possibly rest until every last one of those bastards either bleeds out or bows before you, then my friend, you are in the right place. So pull up a chair and bring some trail mix. Europa Universalis is a real-time strategy game, but it's not what you think of when you think of RTS typically, a la Age of Empires or Command & Conquer. No, this is a grand strategy game, a game built on the very foundations of what personal computer gaming used to mean. Alongside things like military flight sims and computer role-playing games, grand strategy and war games are, in my mind, the pinnacle of the term computer game. Grand strategy itself is an offshoot of your mainstream strategy fare, involving political and military conflict simulation at the scale of an entire nation-state's resources. That is, you're not controlling individuals or placing structures wherever you want, but instead are coordinating a nation's infrastructure, economy, and population on a grand scale. Europa Universalis takes elements of war games, real-time strategy, and kingdom management sims and mixes them all up into a creamy soup of history-soaked goodness. There is no one single goal of the game, and you probably won't even be playing the same way twice due to the various starting and victory conditions, but depending on the scenario and your own desires, you'll be managing anything from a vast empire to a small nation, and expanding it as you see fit. Largely, this will happen through trade, diplomacy, and war, though which of those receives the most attention is up to you. On the right-hand three-quarters of the screen, you've got the map, which shows any territories you own or have ties with, as well as those of your allies, enemies, and neutral parties. This is also where you'll be exploring the known world for the time period, since until you do, it remains terra incognita, all covered up and unable to be interacted with. So producing and moving around troops, traders, and colonists is vital to your expansion, as is sharing maps with allies if you build up a strong enough relationship. All of that stuff happens on the left-hand part of the screen, which contains all sorts of context-sensitive information for what you're doing over on the map, as well as stats for things like battles, cities, and your empire at large. Along the bottom, you've got a message log, which keeps track of all notable events and is most useful if you disable those messages popping up all the time. And finally, along the top is the status bar for your resources, population, political stability, and the current date. If you're familiar with Sid Meier's Civilization, there's definitely a similar vibe going on here, but the game plays very differently, especially with its real-time gameplay as opposed to turn-based. In fact, it can be overwhelming to have so much going on at once, and you'll be pausing, speeding up, and slowing down the passage of time constantly. This and the map navigation are two of my chief complaints, actually. I just think they could be handled better, and indeed, in later games they are. But yeah, this first game is still incredibly playable, and feels like a distinct entity compared to the Civilizations and even the Crusader Kings out there. You know, back when I reviewed King Arthur's Court and rambled on about how much I enjoy these types of territorial conquest things? Yeah, so this is all of that taken to another plane of existence entirely. It's wonderful. The joys of slowly taking over Asia, or Western Europe, or just Ireland, by use of force, trade, shrewd politics, or even arranged marriages is just endlessly satisfying. I quite like the restrictions placed on the gameplay due to the time period, too, since it forces a very specific set of things that can and will happen. Now, this is right when the Americas were being colonized and world powers were shifting, and there were all sorts of amazing new resources to trade and new technologies being invented that were changing the face of war. The gameplay may be overwhelming at times, but once you get used to its quirks, the experience is a comforting one and keeps me glued to the screen for an embarrassing number of hours. Sometimes a guy just wants to be the next Genghis Khan and wreck the entirety of Asia. Other times you want to nestle into your island nation and embrace xenophobia. And if that gets boring, why not convert over to paganism and rile up the nearby Christian pope, or claim the throne of Milan by way of some obscure ancestry that can't be proven or disproven, and start a feud that lasts hundreds of years. I love this, and the fact that the dynamics of how you want to play and how you're forced to play will change so much depending on your chosen empire and financial situation, well, that's all kinds of impressive, and it shows just how much effort went into making each scenario so replayable and making the various empires within them unique. What it comes down to is Europa Universalis is a historical sandbox that is as deep as it is wide, and I never get enough of it. Amazingly, the series only got deeper over the years, and recent editions of the game are almost mind-bogglingly complex in the most awesome ways, but I still find the original to be a solid title all on its own, and it's kind of refreshing to go back to an EU game that isn't quite as much of a monster in terms of complexity. After all, for the most part, the history here hasn't changed, only the methods to explore that history. So in that way, games like this are completely timeless. And if you enjoyed this look back at Europa Universe Awesome, then you might enjoy some of my other videos, as well as those that are set to arrive in the future. New videos are here every Monday and Friday, so subscribing to the channel is beneficial if you like that kind of thing coming to your subscription box. You can also follow and interact with me on Twitter and Facebook for other things throughout the week. And there's also Patreon if you want to be a patron, which lets you see videos even earlier than they go public, as well as some other perks, so go over there and check that out if you're curious. And as always, thank you very much for watching.